The current affordable housing situation is unsustainable here in the Bay Area. We're not producing enough affordable housing for the folks that are most in need. So we've made the decision to invest $150 million to enable developers to build housing for folks that are lowest income, and this is really a part of our larger efforts around a $1 billion fund that we established. The fund really speaks to what we do, which is bring community together.
Good morning, and welcome back. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We had a quick intro and quick video there. I'm Tanua Thresh-Intook, and I'm the Executive Director of the LISC Los Angeles office. I'm also a proud member of the Housing California Board of Directors. I want to thank all of our sponsors and our speakers as well for joining us this week and their support. For this session, I'm excited that I'm going to be co-moderating with Mona Pascal Rogers, the head of the California Public Policy at Facebook. They're also one of our title sponsors. Mona knows state politics well. Many of you know her name. She has previously served in leadership roles in both the Brown and Newsom administrations. In addition to that, I'm also proud of the work that LISC has done in working with the state administration on the California Emergency Rent Relief Program. As the largest and most robust tenant protection program in the nation, we have worked side by side with HCD to continuously improve the program application to make it accessible and easier for people to complete. We know that our most vulnerable Californians who need access to rent relief and utility assistance are the same households that have limited or no broadband internet access, have diverse language needs, and appreciate the assistance of trusted community partners and organizations. That's why we've stood up a network of nearly 120 organizations across the state and our most vulnerable communities. Those organizations are resources to help landlords as well as tenants one-on-one apply for relief. And to date, with the help of community partners and partners like Housing California, we've helped thousands of Californians successfully navigate completing their application. And that's just the start of what we need to help and keep people housed here in California. So Mona, I'm going to turn it over to you to also welcome everyone. Let's hear a little bit more about Facebook stepping into the housing arena. And we look forward to having you introduce our special California leadership this morning, who'll be part of our conversation.
Great. Thank you, Tanua. It is wonderful to be with everyone today, especially with you, one of our partners. Facebook is so proud to be supporting Housing California's 2021 virtual unconference. I'm thrilled to be here representing the Facebook housing team. And I know this, Facebook is about communities and we're about supporting our communities. Long before I joined the team, Facebook committed to many programs, partnerships with LISC and other groups across the state to make sure that we were helping. We were not reinventing, but we were helping. So partnerships are super key. Partnerships, especially, with our policymakers. And so I am so honored and thrilled to introduce, I think, three superheroes who are leading the state and working every day to make sure that things get better, things are on the right track. They are the leading voices on health, housing, and homelessness in the state. The wonderful longtime friend of mine who I'm so proud to be here with is State Controller Betty Yee, the Secretary of California Business and Consumer Services and Housing Agency, Lourdes Castro Ramirez, and Secretary of the California Health and Human Services Agency, Dr. Mark Galley. All three of these superheroes have just long resumes and lists of things that they've done. Please check out their backgrounds on your own. Check them out on the Whova page, but also just check them out and join them. Join them as they do work with us, with you, to make our state even better. So we're excited to have them here today. I am honored to introduce the magnificent, the wonderful State Controller, Betty Yee. Betty?
Thank you so much, Mona and to Tanua, for really hosting us today. First, let me just say it's an honor to be serving on this panel with Secretary Ramirez and Dr. Galley, both of whom, and I just have to say this, we can't thank you enough. In fact, I'm sure the past 18 months have been a lot of days of thankless moments, but just for the important and urgent work that both of you and your teams have been doing, and undertaking just so many of the urgent issues of the day for many Californians in crisis during this pandemic. And look at where we are today, with California reopening at a time when so many had concluded that such an event would be still so far away in the future. So thank you both very much. I think in terms of just maybe helping to level set the conversation today, I know I was posed the question, what's my vision for housing justice in California? And certainly at this time when we see the state, really converging upon so many challenges, but big systemic challenges that I think always create opportunities for us to respond as policymakers. Obviously, recovering from this global health pandemic, looking at the increasing cries for racial equity and justice, the ongoing impacts and effects that we're seeing throughout the state relative to climate change. And then also what we are seeing in California being the lead with respect to looking at how we right historic wrongs, and particularly as we undertake efforts in the discussion around reparations. So I look at all of that and I think about California and where we are today. We are the 5th largest economy in the world still. And, we're recognized globally for so many things. And I do want to highlight these attributes because we still attract so many people to our great state of California because of our innovation, our being a trendsetter, our natural beauty, the diversity of our people, a place where that still holds great promise and opportunity for so many. And yet beneath the sheen is quite a different story. And I think we've all experienced this, particularly over these past 18 months, where housing is costing, housing costs are more and more eating up a greater share of a household's income. We look at housing instability. That is the experience for more and more Californians in all parts of our state. Adding to the population of those who are unhoused in all of our communities. Actually hemorrhaging talent to places outside of California, and then exacerbating longstanding racial wealth disparities. And so I want to first applaud the architects of the California Roadmap Home 2030, because I think the centering of this issue about closing the racial equity gaps in housing and homelessness, at least for me, speaks to the heart of what housing justice looks like, particularly here in a state as diverse as California. We hold a unique place, California does, in terms of our fair housing history, both in terms of adopting discriminatory practices, but also in creating just ways to overcome them. And so to think that in 1916, Berkeley was the first jurisdiction in the nation to create exclusive single-family zoning, which prevented poorer residents, often in communities of color, from living in many areas of that city. And then fast forward to 1963, when California created the model for the Federal Fair Housing Act, with the passage of the Rumford Fair Housing Act that prohibited housing discrimination based on ethnicity, religion, marital status, physical handicap, or familial status. And the Rumford Act really, in my mind, began the conversation about housing discrimination that continues to this day. So, from policies relating to zoning, racial zoning, redlining, public housing, white flight, government-supported racial covenants, and the disproportionate impacts of gentrification and displacement. I think we've learned many lessons that I believe will inform a vision for housing justice. And so, yes, the Roadmap Home is a needed and urgent framework. And I think certainly for creating more affordable housing, for ending homelessness, and closing the racial equity gaps therein. But for me, it doesn't go far enough to recognize that while additional housing will certainly be created, that additional opportunities won't necessarily automatically come for many of our communities, and particularly our communities of color. So by not fully recognizing and measuring the outcomes of past and present discriminatory policies, I don't know that we really have the full extent of the problem that we're trying to solve. And so my vision for housing justice, it is the roadmap home plus incorporating the voices of disproportionately affected communities in housing policy decisions, plus working to change the conversation and the mindset of Californians about housing justice being a win-win, plus stopping with excusing our way out of this, that none of this is possible. I think what we've learned over the past 18 months is that when we have critical needs and urgent needs to tend to, that certainly quick action is possible. And I know our two secretaries will be commenting on that in more detail. And so, but the fact of the matter is that there are still forces and laws that are getting in the way of attaining true and lasting equity. And so, without a doubt, and certainly especially with June 30th looming, housing is at the forefront of concerns for many, many Californians, for families, for local governments, our business community, fellow policymakers, and just about everyone that I think each of us encounter. And so this was true before the pandemic, and it certainly is true now. So access to safe and quality and affordable housing should not just be an economic imperative. It should be a cornerstone of the commitment that we make to all Californians who live and work here and who have and continue to contribute to California being a large global economy. And so I'm often asked, and this is a political question, but I think it's also a very important social question, is housing a basic human right? And I think our actions collectively will answer that question. So I appreciate the opportunity to just launch this panel.
Thank you so much, Controller Yee. Really appreciate you sharing that. You have definitely underscored California's roadmap home. This 2030 vision really is all about meeting the full scale of need for all Californians who are struggling. So that includes creating 1.2 million affordable homes, protecting low-income households from losing their homes and ending homelessness. And as you talked about with some of the policies started in Berkeley, closing the racial equity gaps in housing and homelessness here in California. So you're going to be part of the conversation, so stay on board. But at the moment, we'd like to invite our secretary. Secretary, you were here last year talking about some key programs. And I imagine this year, having seen some of the work that you're doing up close, you've been super, super busy. Tell us a little bit more, if you could also share your vision for housing justice. Introducing now Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez.
Thank you so much, Tunua. And yes, I was here about a year ago. I think at the time I shared with the audience that I was appointed by the governor and was sworn in on March the 2nd. And 2 days later, on March the 4th, the governor declared a state of emergency. And so, as we all know, we have been very much addressing this public health crisis and addressing the disproportionate impact that this has had on the communities hardest hit. But first, just want to again, thank Housing California for the invitation to be part of this conference, and also express my sincere appreciation to Controller Betty Yee for the partnership with us on many fronts, from rent relief to also getting dollars out during the height of the pandemic as we were dispersing the emergency homelessness funding through the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. I want to also acknowledge Secretary Mark Galley, just really an amazing leader, and it's a privilege to work with him every single day. And Mona, a pleasure to meet you. I look forward to continuing to work with Facebook. Very much appreciate how Facebook is supporting communities across the state with regard to amplifying the importance of making the connection to access to affordable housing and really the supports necessary to stay housed. And so, in answer to your question, Tunua, I firmly believe that safe, stable, and affordable housing that is well integrated into neighborhoods is a platform to opportunities. And I think that I come at this work from that perspective, right? But we know that access to safe, stable housing is out of reach for many people, particularly many people of color. Why? Because they're disproportionately paying more for housing costs than what they can afford. Secondly, because they are more likely to be evicted. And thirdly, because they also have a harder time accessing well-resourced neighborhoods. So as we, tackle the housing and homelessness crisis, we must recognize that that this crisis is having a disproportionate and uneven impact across race and class, with Black, Indigenous, Latino, and low-income Asian and Pacific Islander people really experiencing the brunt of this in a disproportionate manner. And so recognizing this is a priority for this administration. And so when we speak about housing justice, and when I, as I reflected on the question about what is my vision for housing justice, I firmly believe is about addressing the magnitude of the housing problem at its root, and acknowledging the deep racial and economic disparities that are embedded in the history of redlining and restrictive covenants and discriminatory practices that have kept certain people out of neighborhoods, or certain people out of access to safe, affordable housing. And Controller Yi spoke very eloquently about this history, and about recognizing that there are existing inequities. But housing justice is about action, right? It's about us taking action and working with intention to ensure that we're able to acknowledge the history and develop policies, practices, and programs to reverse that history. It's also about bringing people together across disciplines and across communities to create a different reality. And so I firmly believe, although I'm a houser at heart, that we can't tackle this just with the housing community, right? It's important to work across the spectrum with diverse stakeholders, government, private sector, public sector, residents, health. So really, creating a robust network of individuals all rowing in the same direction. And so I'm, very encouraged that this is what we are doing now. This is, we're focused and we're working on building an equitable housing system with people at the center, using data, advancing policies that are much more inclusive, and ensuring that there's greater access to safe, healthy, affordable housing. And of course, as we all know, the pandemic made very clearly, and made in a very visible way, right, the deep structural problems that we must continue to address, and that we must also continue to move with a sense of urgency to ensure that every California has a safe and affordable housing, and really a safe and affordable place to call home. So we can forge a new path, we can reimagine housing while also centering racial and economic equity. And as you mentioned, Tanua, about a year ago, when I had an opportunity to be here for this conference, I shared with you all the creation of what we called at the time the Housing Advance Working Group. And this was a body of folks from state government and also partners working on these issues that helped shape the framework that we have been using over the course of the last 15 months or so to drive our focus and to drive our investments when it comes to housing stability, housing access. And that framework is what we call the 4 Ps. A continued focus on protecting vulnerable communities, specifically ensuring that we're doing much more to address individuals that are experiencing homelessness, to address the need for housing for all, really the from prevention to permanent housing, in the space of protection, also doing everything possible to ensure that renters and homeowners are able to stay in their homes. And so we'll have an opportunity to to speak more to that. In the space of preservation, continuing to work with communities to ensure that we are doing all possible to preserve housing affordability, and working with communities, to come up with policies and strategies and funding support to do that. And then, the third P being very much around production. We need to continue to produce more housing, but we need to continue to produce more housing that is affordable, right? Because the greatest gap in terms of housing is housing that is affordable to households that are making below 60% of AMI. And then the last P of this framework is about people, and always, being very clear about who we're serving, and ensuring that that drives, the policy decisions, and that drives, the programmatic investment decisions that we're making. So I look forward to sharing, more detail as we continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Secretary. Really appreciate your guidance and all the work that you've done. So the next superhero that I know that Facebook has had a lot of the honor of working with quite a lot over the last year is Secretary Mark Galley. Secretary, will you share with us your work and your vision for housing justice?
Sure. Thank you, Mona, and thank you, Tanua, for including me, and thank you, Controller Yee and Secretary Castro Ramirez. It's always fun. I looked at the lineup and I said, oh, I'm following Lourdes. This should be easy, because she is so incredible and eloquent and speaks with such passion and comprehensive nature on the work that we have at state government. I'm going to shift just a little bit and talk. I get the easy part to say ditto on some of that vision, and then fill in what I think is an important part of this. And I remember it's over a decade ago in Los Angeles, creating Housing for Health. And we were trying to name that effort, and it sort of just rolled off, right? That housing for health, health is housing, housing is health. And this idea that at least the Health and Human Services Agency sees housing and homelessness as critical parts of our broader Health for All agenda. And so the vision for housing justice is part of our broader Health for All vision, because we think that that Health for All vision really does build upon some of the challenges we saw during COVID, really get fully exposed. I called COVID throughout the pandemic to our team the great unmasker of disparities and the great accelerant for change. And so what did we see in terms of unmasking? And I remember asked very early on in the pandemic, what was I worried about? And I said, people who are unhoused, they're going to suffer a great deal. People who are low income, our brown and Black communities, they're going to suffer a great deal. We quickly started to collect the data in our state, not without some hiccups, but we did do it to identify those gaps and to tell that story very effectively. And I think throughout the pandemic, we did help secure in people's thinking this idea of equity, around racial equity, around age, around gender, around socioeconomic status, so many different areas where we've seen inequities play out during COVID. We've also seen them for decades play out in the housing space as well. I want to spend a minute talking about kind of the idea of what the safety net is in state government. I lazily call myself a safety net guy. I really care about building up the safety net, thinking about it as a true net that's meant to capture people. And I've always seen my job pre-pandemic, early in the pandemic, to fill the holes in the net and to spend time trying to widen it as much as possible. And part of that net is about housing, about who qualifies for housing, what kind of housing do people have access to, and what are the services that go with that housing. Throughout the pandemic, though, I've started to nuance this idea of a safety net, and and talk also about lifting the net up and trying to understand how we don't cause people who are vulnerable to have to fall so far down before they get the kind of support and services that they need. So for me, and this will come full circle in just a moment, it's thinking about housing as part of that safety net and lifting it up so that people don't need to be so disabled, so sick, so chronically homeless to qualify for some of the important services and housing resources that we need to make available. I think the controller said it beautifully about housing as an essential right. I think that our behaviors and our choices and our investments in allowing it to be more easily accessed by folks makes it more likely that more people are going to have it as part of their safety net. So really working the vision of lifting up the safety net in this recovery period includes improving opportunities to house people and house people safely. To talk just for a moment about the services, on the health side, we talk a lot about, well, should healthcare really be funding housing? Should healthcare be funding housing services? And given that California has been a leader around this notion of whole person care, I don't see how we don't continue to invest our care and resources and services in ensuring that fundamental tool to stay healthy, be healthy is available to some of our sickest and most vulnerable Californians. So with that in mind, part of the vision that we have, and I say a big we, because it's so many people on my team, it's so many people across state government that think this way, we want to make sure that we're using the health care services options and arena, as well as the social services options and arena to really support the services for people who are experiencing homelessness or on the cusp of experiencing housing instability. We did a tremendous lift in the past 5 years, 6 years really, through the whole person care pilots in California. One of the key pieces of work that I look forward to is pushing out our CalAIM proposal and really building in to the fabric of our Medicaid system, those housing supports that, sure, it isn't, let's build new units necessarily with these resources, although there are some opportunities to help support those units with, first and last, move-in subsidies, even in some cases, some other types of subsidies. I'll share an exciting opportunity in a moment as well, but really building that into the base of our Medicaid system through the CalAIM approach, not just saying, hey, if you're interested or if you'd like to do these things, but to really increase the penetration of Medicaid using its resources to support people to get housed and stay housed, I think is an important part of what I see as part of this health and housing justice mission. Secretary Castro Ramirez and I, a few months ago, partnered to come up with a plan that is now memorialized. We hope will come out in the signed budget, but really an effort to end family homelessness and to address family homelessness in a significant way over the next handful of years in California. And that includes a rich level of services for families who are on the cusp or are actually experiencing homelessness to get back into stable housing, to have the services and resources. And part of the governor's, $100 billion Roar Back California Comeback Plan to really invest in services to support families and end family homelessness in California. As a pediatrician, as somebody who took care of many young children in my clinical practice who were in families, strong families that just didn't have housing, and to see the impact on those young people, to see the system impacts and the trauma, I think this is not just an important issue for us to consider, but for us to deliver on in the next handful of years. I saw in the chat, and some of my department directors, Kim McCoy-Wade, who has worked so hard on the master plan for aging, just continues to beat the drum on housing. for older Californians. I saw in the chat the fact that so many more Californians are aging in this state, that we have a real crisis on our hands to need to address with thoughtful, service-enriched housing approaches. I know the Secretary is leading in this area as well, but coming together as a state family to have a vision that says no older California will be on our streets, that we will create the kind of housing, the kind of services to go with that housing that allow those individuals to be safely and successfully housed for the duration of their lives. And then lastly, I just want to identify one other part of this vision that I think comes out in CalAIM that is an important part of our home and community-based services proposal that California will be submitting to the federal government shortly, that also addresses housing and looks to create novel and innovative partnerships with our federal family to push forward more resources to house individuals. But that housing that is available to those who are exiting our justice system. So much of what I had the privilege of working on in Los Angeles was reentry work, diversion work, and the fact that so many people, frankly, mainly men of color, but yes, women of color too, exit our justice system with not just no resources on the health and social services side, but literally nowhere to go to sleep. And how do we right that wrong? How do we make sure that part of our housing justice vision and framework is to not allow that to continue, to build housing that is both in the communities that we expect individuals leaving incarceration will enter, as well as supported with the resources that help those individuals get on their feet. So those are just a few additions to what I think both the controller and the secretary laid out beautifully, that are part of the vision that I see for California with housing and homelessness.
Well, Dr. Galley, you certainly rounded it out and gave a real good sense as to why having all three of your voices in this conversation is so important. And I want to thank you for pointing out that you are a pediatrician. I was wondering about the artwork behind you. And now I know that it may not have just been you, that maybe some of your clients helped to contribute to that.
Oh, they're smarter than that. These clients don't let me be their doctor. These are just my 4 kids, and their requirement that if I keep doing these Zooms, I've got to put them out on Front Street a little bit. So that's what I do.
Well, part of the reason why I have this background is because I've got a 5-year-old who keeps peeking his head in. So you might see him from time to time. So you all have laid out some very powerful visions for what is possible. And I think that California is well served and quite lucky to have public servants and leaders who understand that housing is justice, is what you said, that access to safe, healthy, and affordable housing is a must. That you're already thinking about the P's: prevention, protection, preservation, production, and people, which resonated with a number of folks. And Dr. Galley, you pointed out the 2 sides of the coin. Health is housing, housing is health. And you used the term that, we really needed this year, which was a safety net. And making sure that we have that for people in community and people returning to community. So, Mona, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask our first question, but we do want to remind our audience out there that you can ask. This is a dynamic panel here, so please do put your questions in the Q&A, put them in the chat. There's the Whova app as well. And we encourage you to put those there so that they can be part of the conversation and we can hear from you. Dr. Galley's already started answering questions that I had on my list in the chat. So don't worry, to our panelists, we will get to those and send those out to you. So Mona, let's shift over to, we've got this vision, but this year was a year that was quite unprecedented. And this year has allowed us to accelerate and creatively think about housing. I'll leave the next question up to you.
Absolutely. So, I think that this past year has really caused us to think outside of the box. There was no, every day working about thinking how we pivot. And so I'd like to get from you, just thinking outside of the box, if you could make one or two dramatic changes to the way we address housing and homelessness in California, what would it be? And what kind of partnerships that are needed? And be tough on us. Let's start with Madam Controller.
Thank you, Mona, for the question. I think after hearing Secretary Castro Ramirez and Dr. Galley, you're seeing just some of that partnership unfold in real time. And so partnerships are key. And you mentioned that at the outset of your comments. We can't do this alone. And I so much appreciate Dr. Galley really talking about housing is health and health is housing. I mean, when you think about any number of us who know people who are facing housing insecurity and just what that means in terms of their overall health and what California has done in terms of being a leader relative to the focus on whole person care. What I would say is really important is really ownership of where we need to be headed. I, as controller, I have to say, I'm just really happy that we have such an abundance of fiscal resources right now that I hope really does help to continue to just further a lot of the innovation that's been started, that we don't have to reinvent anything new. I mean, I'm just going to say this, it's never about the next new shiny object. We know what the solutions are. And it's really about the will to work together. It's about hopefully eliminating some of the silos and the turf wars that we've been having around housing that frankly, I think have exacerbated just some of the disparities that we're seeing. And so we start at the state level. So you've heard about the tremendous cooperation between different agencies within the administration. I think more can happen. Just as we've focused housing with health, I think we can also focus it with respect to employment and work and the economy. That when we think about the concept of unemployment benefits, and I would consider that as part of the larger safety net as well. How do we reinvent that to where we are not seeing people have been displaced by this economy, which had not been working for everyone, to have to figure out how to climb back up, to look for a quality job, and obviously housing being a very, very important work adjacent issue in people's lives. But I think the state also can do better, and I know we've been in conversations, Secretary Castro Ramirez, about just looking how the state can do better in terms of our business of running housing programs. So how do we look at really streamlining a lot of our funding programs and our services so that we can look at this more holistically? I'm in the kind of the production side of the housing conversation, but frankly, it's an incomplete conversation when we can't talk about the services that are attendant to how we're going to serve many of our more vulnerable Californians, when we can't be in a conversation with local governments about what they need to do as far as helping to further this housing justice vision, and also bring in the voices of the affected communities to the table. I think that is so key, because it may mean that the innovation is going to come right from those communities who have been living with so many of these challenges that we might have missed just some of the strategies that really need to be part of what we support.
Great. Secretary Castro Ramirez.
Yes, thank you, Mona. I just want to really appreciate the controller's comments. Betty, you're, I think, spot on. It is about partnerships, but I also think it's building on the partnerships and ensuring that there's good coordination across the housing finance system. And I think, the coordination really requires that we, first of all, that we not assume that just because we're working on housing that we're all sort of rowing in the same direction, right? Oftentimes, we're implementing different approaches or strategies that sometimes, can sort of work against, the common effort. And I have been, extremely encouraged by what we have been able to do in the last year in terms of coordinating the housing finance system. Working, with a more sort of purpose and focus internally within agency across all of the housing and homelessness, entities that are within agency, HCD, Department of Real Estate, Department of Fair Employment and Housing, the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council, College of Faye, and ensuring that there is sort of the cross collaboration. So I think Mona, sort of an answer to your question, if there was one or two, I'm going to say three dramatic changes that I could make. I think one is to continue honing in on strengthening the housing finance system, the coordination across, and then working very closely to ensure that as we strengthen that coordination, right, that we are establishing a baseline and a common, data set to measure, our progress, and to be able to be more transparent about how that information gets shared at the state level, at the local level, and also at the federal level. And we've made tremendous progress also there. We have much more data available to us. As an example, within the Homeless Coordinating Financing Council, just 3 months ago, we launched the Homeless Data Integration System that pulls together data about the homelessness response system across the state using the HMIS data from the 44 continuums of care. We have insight into how the system is supporting and providing access and opportunities and the outcomes that are being achieved through these 44 continuums. And that's, really tremendous, to be able to have, access to that data, because it allows us to do a few things. One is, to, again, understand, like, who are we serving? What services are being provided? What's the impact, of those services? What are the best practices? How do we lift them up? And then where are the gaps, right? What more do we need to do? So first priority would be around just continuing to strengthen the housing finance system and the housing and homelessness response system across the board. The second piece, and this really builds on the point of equity, I think it's really important that we recognize that we need to do more to create opportunities for people of color to come into the affordable housing space, right? And to lead in this field, because the majority of the individuals that we're serving are people of color. And I think that the affordable housing community, the public housing community, they're working to serve this population, but we know we can do more to increase the pipeline. So bringing more people of color into the field, working closely with universities to promote programs that encourage college graduates to go into the field of housing and community development, and then also making the connection to residents that are living in affordable housing communities or public housing communities, and providing the opportunity that they also be part of this. I started in this work working as a community planner, community organizer. I worked 10 years for the LA City Housing Authority, and my first job was working at Imperial Courts in Watts and leading the National Jobs Plus initiative, which was focused on really tearing apart this perception that people have of individuals that live in assisted housing, that somehow there's something wrong with them, that they don't have the capacity to lead, to change, the trajectory of their lives, right? When we know that that's not the case, when we know that when there's a proper support, proper access to services, proper access to affordable housing and supports, that people are able to rise to the occasion and reach for their potential. And so I think it's important, so my second sort of dramatic change would be, let's continue to ground our work in creating opportunities for individuals that know more about this challenge than sometimes we do, and also the next generation of housers and community development folks, and then support those organizations that are led by Black, Indigenous people of color, just as we have done with the changes that we made to the CITLAC scoring criteria this year, where we established a set aside that allows for BIPOC organizations to have their own pot of funding, to be able to support the work that they're doing, which oftentimes is more holistic, right? It's about bringing all the pieces together. And then the last dramatic change that I would make is I would wholeheartedly support, of course, and do what we can to increase federal resources for housing. The Biden administration in the jobs proposal has included and has really lifted up housing as infrastructure and putting forward additional dollars to expand, housing resources, including an additional 200,000 new housing choice vouchers for families. And with all of the investments that the state is making and has made, the 6,000 units produced under Home Key, the affordable housing shovel-ready projects that we hope will be funded in this upcoming fiscal year. As we build more housing, we know that it's important to have the operating subsidy and those vouchers to ensure that, that there's sustainability, continuity, and stability for these families. So that would be the third piece: more federal resources. And frankly, we're very grateful to the federal administration, the Biden-Harris administration, because housing and homelessness is a priority. I have, in my 25, 30 years of being in this profession, like, I have never seen housing and homelessness be centered the way that it's being centered now. And so I think this is a once in a lifetime, opportunity. And I'm, proud that Governor Newsom and this administration is doing everything possible to ensure that those resources are, that we're targeting and deploying those resources and continuing to strengthen that relationship at the federal level.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. So, Dr. Galley, the same for you if you had one or two dramatic changes, but I also, we've talked about a lot. You may have, a couple lessons learned that you want to share with us before we get to a number of the great questions, other questions that are coming in. And thank you, everybody, for doing that.
Yeah, Mona, I'll try to be speedy because, again, just reiterate, thank you for putting me after Lourdes. She covers things so well. I'll just hit on a few quick things. So I think we need a new revitalized workforce to help connect people with the services and the housing. We learned in LA kind of the hard way. We passed Measure H, and a couple of years into it, we had 1,000 vacancies for positions in the homeless services sector. So I think building on, Secretary Castro Ramirez's really good point about building the workforce. I think you need the services, boots on the ground workforce built up in a significant way so that we make meaningful change in the linkage between services, people, and homelessness and housing, Again, building on something else, Secretary Castro Ramirez said, it's on the federal flexibilities. Not only are there new partnerships that we have to forge with the feds, my hope is that we can California's interest in being really flexible and crossing silos and bringing resources together that might be food resources or housing resources or health resources, to bring them together in a way to really treat people like people and not just as empty stomachs, no place to sleep, bad healthcare, but to really build on that whole person care idea. I think we need to work, and I believe we have a very receptive federal government on all levels, to come up with something that's innovative and flexible and gives California the permission to be, even more forward-leaning than we have been on some of those ideas. And then the third thing is diversifying our toolkit to allow us to do more. This is an urgent situation. We learned it in the pandemic. We're seeing in the quote recovery phase that the number of individuals who are facing homelessness didn't go away while we were addressing the pandemic. It only got worse. It only deepened in certain parts of our state. So how do we create more opportunities? I appreciate the need to build more, but how do we take advantage of what's already built? Flexible subsidies that I think some counties, some entities are starting to build around. How do we advance the science of doing that? How do we make sure it's done responsibly and broaden it as an available tool to help people get into housing now? Shifting to a lesson learned, and I'm glad you asked, Mona, because one of the things that I struggled with during the pandemic was we talk a lot about, well, the underlying inequities drove what we saw in COVID. And absolutely that's the case. But I personally struggled knowing the connection between housing and health. Like, what was it about the way California houses lower income Californians? What is it about that led to such devastation in certain communities when it came to COVID? And I wandered upon this National Multi-Family Housing Council report from earlier in the year. And we were also focused on density, and density does matter, but some of the most densely populated parts of our state, and frankly, parts of the nation, didn't see what some less densely populated places saw in terms of devastation from COVID. And the key this report pointed to was crowding. And so when I think about one of the challenges or lessons learned that we need to be paying attention to, and I think about this in a healthcare lens, so excuse me, we've been so focused on healthcare access that sometimes we forget about the quality piece. And access is quality, so I don't want to dismiss that, but it's great when we get to the conversation where it's not access alone, but it's access and quality. And when I think about one of the lessons learned on housing and its connection to the pandemic, it was that California relies and requires people, because of the scarcity of housing and the cost of rent, to double up, triple up, quadruple up, we took for granted that this was something that was done throughout so many communities in our state. And this report identified 9 out of the 10 most crowded communities in the nation are in Southern California. 2 are in Orange County, 7 are in Los Angeles, and they are the places that saw the worst devastation with COVID. So in our pursuit to address housing and get people housed, how do we keep one eye on the crowding factor and addressing that? Because we're not going to be so lucky to wait another 100 years. Our kids, our communities are going to see this again. It's just the way of the globe. And we owe it to them to put the down payment on what we saw as the conditions in housing that drove the pandemic along these inequities that we've talked about in such a rich way today. So just raising up this concept of crowding and what do we do about it? How do we think about it? How do we address it? How do we bring all of our resources to bear on that issue? I think is an important challenge for not just this panel, but I'm sure so many of the people who have a hand in helping think about that who are tuning in today.
Yeah, thanks for underscoring that, Dr. Galley. COVID-19 presented a new set of challenges, urgency, and revealed and certainly exacerbated some of the inequities that already existed. And part of what we're hearing here today is that this has given us a chance to implement things that we never thought we'd be able to implement before. But beyond that, you're reminding us as a healthcare professional that this could potentially happen again. And so making sure that we're documenting the lessons learned is super critical and picking those out along the way. So to our esteemed panelists, we've had several questions from the audience. I've got about 3 here, and I'm going to give you all an opportunity to decide which ones you want to answer. They're related to specific populations, the elderly, disabled. They're related to the staffing and making sure that as we do all the great things that each of you talked about, Secretary Ramirez talked about coordination between agencies and, the implementation of new programs. That means that we've got to have staff. at the state and local levels who can implement. And then finally, there's questions around innovation, and people have got ideas about how to really live up to the vision that you all started with. So with that, maybe Mona, I'll toss out maybe one question related to specific populations. So Dr. Galley, you started answering this, but there are a number of folks on the line who want to know, how do we protect seniors? How do we support the disabled? What are we recommending for disabled persons who are nearly homeless because they can't afford housing in California on SSI or SSDI? And what can we do given the growing number of seniors and residents who are over 55 in California who are having a really difficult time navigating housing options and getting connected to resources? So any thoughts about that from our panel?
Tanua, I'll start there. I think one of the most exhilarating aspects about this panel today is there are no limits to what's possible. And, obviously California, the state of California can deliver. It's demonstrated it can deliver over the past 18 months. And, what I would say about, certainly with the hat that I wear when I think about the economy 24/7, I think there are a lot of economic benefits for looking at how we serve our most, vulnerable communities. All the way from looking at new industry sectors that can be developed. I know with the master plan on aging that the governor took such leadership on, I think about California's demographics. We have an aging population, and most older adults in California want to age in place. They want to stay in their own homes, stay in their own communities. And so I think our challenge is, how do we build that ecosystem around them for that to be possible? And what are all of the attendant supports and services that really can be brought to bear in those communities, and how do we develop kind of a workforce initiative around that, all of these emerging industry sectors? And I think about that with respect to every challenge that we have, whether it be climate change, whether it be this issue about how we keep people in their homes, when we look at how we're going to develop new entrepreneurial opportunities to deal with some of the most pressing challenges of the state. And so I think what I would say is I don't want us to feel like we need to be boxed in with kind of the solutions as usual and what we've been doing as usual, because there's nothing as usual going forward about what we're trying to tackle here. And I think through the partnerships, through the innovation, and again, through the elevating of community voice, that we're going to have a lot of innovation that will be before us. And I think the role of the state really is to support all of that. And to really drive this as an economic issue, as a health issue, and the integration that Dr. Galley talked about, which I am just so thrilled to hear about, actually at the end of the day will save us money. When you think about it, we're going to be looking at just how we're addressing all these challenges in a more integrated way, not siloed, and in a way that I hope will really uplift people's quality of life in all communities.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Galley, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to just briefly mention that the integration and working, the cross collaboration and cross collaborative efforts that are occurring, as Secretary Galley mentioned, health is housing and housing is health, and we know that, we embrace that. And so as we think about the work of expanding services, expanding, housing or strengthening housing stability, expanding, housing affordability. I think, continuing our work around continuing to not lose focus of understanding where the gaps are the greatest and for what populations. And so, Secretary Galley mentioned that we are working closely, our teams are working closely on developing an approach to addressing the rising number of families with children that are experiencing homelessness, and coming up with a coordinated approach and effort to be much more focused and intentional. The master plan on aging is something that we're very much involved in. I believe 6 out of the 14 goals are in the housing space, if not even more than that. And so our teams are working very closely to ensure that we're connecting the dots. The Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council 3-4 months ago approved and adopted a comprehensive action plan to prevent and end homelessness that speaks to the overall sort of focus and goals and strategies, but also that centers again race, economics, and populations that are most impacted. So all that to say is that I think that it is important, right, that we understand the populations that continue to have less access, to housing stability and services, and that we continue to build on the collaboration that is occurring across state government. So it's happening. It needs to happen, not just sort of at the state level. It needs to happen also at the local level. And we're learning from communities that some communities are really great about doing this. Others need additional technical assistance and or support from us. And so we're also as partners in this work are working closely with those communities to help build that level of coordination and integration at the local level.
So Mona, maybe at this time we can move to really our final question for our panelists, and then I'll come back and wrap up. But I think part of what we're moving towards in the urgency that we see in the chat is all about, what's next and what can we do? Mona, I'll punt that question to you.
So, yes, what's next and what do we do? But I think what that means is from each of you, what is your inspirational challenge to us? What can all of us do? What can all of us who are watching this, what can we do to be the ones that help streamline, to be the ones that ensure partnerships and lifting each other? I'll start with Dr. Galley.
Sure, and thank you again for letting me be part of this. I think simply put, first off, can't waste a chance to say one thing you can do is get vaccinated if you haven't been, and encourage those you work with to get vaccinated, and make sure that you're sending a strong message that this is a tool that saves lives, and we're not through this completely yet. And we're enjoying some really good numbers here in California, but especially for those who are most vulnerable, those who are experiencing homelessness, who are near homeless. We want to make sure that news is out there. So that's one thing you can all do. So thank you for agreeing and signing up for that. I think one thing that I do with my own team on partnership is challenge them to go make a new friend, go think about something differently. I mean, for many of you on this Zoom, you probably don't know your local health plans. You probably don't know what's happening. Some of you certainly do. I've seen that in the chat. I can't see all of you, and I'd probably be embarrassed maybe for making that statement. But if there is something on the health and human services side where you say, hey, that could be a really interesting partnership, let me learn what that might turn into. Because I have to say, I'm always struck by how many win-wins we kind of leave on the field and on the table, and we don't challenge ourselves to go find them. So find a new partner, find a win-win, dream it up in your head and try to go get it, because there's a lot of housing that doesn't get used in the most efficient, successful way. And there's a lot of services that don't. But maybe if we locally marry those up, we at the state incentivize those innovations, those partnerships from happening, we might find that we can get a lot farther with what we have as we pursue trying to build more. So I think that's one final important thing to say, Mona and Tanua. Thank you again for having me on the panel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Galley. Secretary Castro Ramirez, challenge and inspiration.
Yes, again, thank you so much to Housing California for this, convening. Tanua, thank you for your partnership with the state on the rent relief program. As Tanua mentioned, we're working very closely to continue to strengthen the access, to this resource, right, by expanding the network of community-based organizations that are working on the ground to serve as bridges for landlords and tenants to access this resource. And Mona, thank you for co-facilitating this conversation. I think in terms of what we can do, or the challenge and really the opportunity, I think the challenge, and it goes back to Noah mentioned staffing, right, and capacity. We have an incredible opportunity, right, with the federal resources that are coming in, with the state resources. I think everyone knows that the governor in the May revision put forward a very historic and robust housing and homelessness investment plan that calls for $9 billion, to further housing affordability, and just over $12 billion to address homelessness comprehensively. And as we implement, right, as we work with the legislature first to pass, to get this budget in place, but the hard work then is implementing, right, and making sure that we're getting these resources out. And that really requires that we continue to staff up. HCD, as an example, within our state family, has been growing by leaps and bounds. We're getting close to 1,000 staff members working within the Housing Community Development Department. And so, I think the challenge will be to continue to ensure that we have proper staffing, proper training, proper support to deliver on these very needed programs. In some ways, I feel like we're making up for decades of not having resources and trying to ramp up as quickly as possible. And I think the opportunity or the inspirational opportunity, I guess, that we have is as state government, demonstrating the power of government, right? That we can be nimble, that we can be partners, that we can be innovative and creative. We showed that, through Project Room Key, through Home Key, through the changes that we're making to the housing finance system. And, so, continuing to demonstrate the power of being in government and working in partnership with local communities and supporting them, because the work happens at the local level, right? And then continuing to to strengthen the relationship with our federal partners. So I am very optimistic. I know that the work ahead is hard, but I know that we're laser focused on building an equitable economic recovery. And as the governor says, coming back with roar, and he says roaring back, coming back with roar and resilience and compassion.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. So, Madam Controller, you are always the one to push, the envelope and to inspire. So bring it home for us.
Well, first of all, I've been inspired, and just thank you to Secretary Castro Ramirez and Secretary Galley for just a really wonderful panel about possibilities. First, I want to just thank Housing California for not delinking housing and homelessness in the conversation. That has happened way too long, and so thank you for that. Secondly, we still have our work cut out for us in terms of our work collectively to ban explicitly discriminatory practices in housing, and unfortunately, that still exists. That I am really hopeful, and as a former state budget director. One of my dreams is to actually see budget hearings where in every aspect of policy we hear housing mentioned. That it is, and as I said, if we think about housing as a human right, the only way we're going to really be sure that that is recognized and realized by every Californian is through our collective action. And so, it just touches so many aspects of our of Californians' lives. But also, I think the best policies come when we consider what we've all talked about here, the human aspect. And, the governor has been really putting forth since day one a vision about a California for all. And so it's not just about building more housing, which obviously all three of us here are focused on. It's about being sure that the opportunities created from building more housing is actually are real opportunities that are afforded to every single Californian. But at the end of the day, it's also about how we build healthy communities and to be sure that those who are going to have those opportunities for the housing that we do build that will certainly uplift quality of life are going to be able to live here in California with a lifetime sense of belonging. And it's something that I think, as we talk about equity, which is going to be probably at the core of everything we do from this point out, because we've seen so much of it just uncovered over the past 18 months and even before then. I think this whole area of housing can really be a model about how we really can accomplish and attain true and lasting equity and justice. And so I'm excited about the work ahead. And I know with partners like Housing California, with leaders like Secretaries Galley and Castro Ramirez, we're already on our way. And I hope that we can expand the table to be sure that we are bringing those community voices so that we know that what we are developing together will have lasting impact. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Controller Yee, to Secretary Castro Ramirez, and to Secretary Dr. Galley for sharing your insights, your vision, and your action there in Sacramento to advance a progressive housing agenda. And thank you to you, Mona, as well, for serving as my co-moderator in this conversation. We are about to close, but just before we do, I do have two reminders. Enjoy your lunch break, but while you're on your lunch break, we'd ask you to stop back by and talk with HCD. Your public servants are here for you. They've got office hours. Learn more about AB 434 and beyond, and also learn more about how HCD is making it easier to apply for affordable housing dollars. And then we look forward to seeing everyone at 1 o'clock for our concurrent workshop on the role of lenders and investors in financing the future we've talked about, scaling public-private partnership to advance housing and homelessness together as solutions, and decriminalizing poverty and advancing housing justice. Take a look at the agenda tab for more details. We want to thank all of you for your great questions out there and your robust participation in Q&A and chat. So we'll see you a little later. Thanks so much again.